dread filled the USS Minnesota's crew on the morning of March 9, 1862. Throughout the previous day, they had been helpless to prevent the rebellion's metal monster from effortlessly destroying Congress and Cumberland, its armored hull deflecting all return fire. They'd grounded hard and only escaped destruction through falling tides and darkness. Approaching smoke announced that Virginia was returning to finish the job. Salvation had supposedly arrived, but Minnesota's sailors were doubtful. How could a cheese box on a raft hope to withstand Virginia's fury? The sailors didn't realize they were about to witness one of the seminal clashes in the history of naval warfare. Join us for this interlude on the naval theater of the American Civil War. Every week we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. Civil wars are inherently internal affairs. Consequently, navies rarely matter in terms of their outcome. The American Civil War was an exception. The Confederacy's economy was entirely based on overseas trade, making open sea lanes critical to the war effort. Additionally, Eastern America has numerous navigable rivers and inlets that allow for the rapid movement of troops and supplies. Therefore, both sides knew that achieving both brown and blue water naval supremacy was critical to victory. The Union Navy was tasked with enforcing a complete blockade of southern ports, taking control of the inland waterways, and fighting rebel ships wherever they were found. The Confederate Navy sought to protect southern ports and break the blockade. While the Union had a harder job, it was also better positioned to accomplish its missions. Pre-war, the US Navy Registry had 90 ships, 42 were in active service, and 48 were in various states of mothballing. Many, including all of its largest ships, were outdated sailing ships, and many steamships had new technology design flaws. It had neither a formal fleet doctrine nor admirals, and squadrons existed mostly for administrative efficiency. Individual cruising captains patrolled the sea lanes, protecting American shipping and suppressing piracy on their own initiative. When larger formations were needed, the senior-most captain would be temporarily appointed commodore to lead the mission. The higher rank of flag officer was seldom used. As the succession crisis loomed, the Navy moved all its useful ships and naval stores to safer ports. Consequently, the secessionists only captured a handful of mothballed ships and the Pensacola Naval Yard prior to Fort Sumter. This proved to be no prize, as federally held Fort Pickens closed Pensacola's harbor. The Union Navy left no doubt of this by bombarding and destroying the yard, Fort McCree, and unintentionally nearby Warrington in late 1861. Gosport Shipyard, modern-day Norfolk, was taken by Virginian secessionists via subterfuge on April 21, 1861, with its stores intact. This would be the Union Navy's biggest loss of the war. Both sides quickly began appropriating civilian steamers for military use, until purpose-built warships were ready, but the South couldn't match the North in expertise or tonnage. Most American shipping was crewed and based out of northern ports. Moreover, the majority of ocean-going ships were built in New England, New York, or Philadelphia, while St. Louis produced the most riverboats. The numerous southern ports were designed primarily for receiving import-export traffic and minor repairs. Although 25% of the Navy's personnel joined the South, there were never enough ships for them, and the Confederate Navy would only commission 101 vessels throughout the war. The Confederacy's first Secretary of the Navy, Stephen Mallory, was fully aware that the South lacked the industry to match Union numbers. Thus, he intended to beat them on quality and innovation. He would fail. The Confederacy paid for 5 casement ironclads on the Mississippi River in mid-1861. 3 were burned to avoid capture by approaching Union forces before being finished. The Louisiana was so poorly designed and built that it couldn't steam against the current. It was briefly used as a gun barge before being burned to avoid capture by approaching Union forces. Only the Arkansas ever saw service as a gunboat. It launched on April 26, 1861, after 8 months of construction, and successfully evaded Union squadrons on both the Yazoo and Mississippi rivers. Then, it was burned to avoid capture by approaching Union forces in August. Meanwhile, the 7 shallow-draft City-class Ironclads, which formed the core of Union naval power on the Mississippi River, were designed, built and launched in 100 days, entering service in January 1862. They first saw action on February 6th and fought in every naval action thereafter. 5 survived the war. Abraham Lincoln's blockade declaration on April 19, 1861 was unprecedented in world history. No navy had ever been asked to close 180 ports along 3,500 miles of coastline. However, the Union Navy rose to the challenge, embarrassing the Army with its industriousness. Fort Pickens was reinforced, and Pensacola's closure was confirmed on April 11th. By April 24th, the few available ships were on station and intercepting Confederate shipping. The 4 blockade squadrons were organized in May. By June, the large freighters the cotton trade depended on had all been seized or had learned to stay away from the blockade lines, a process helped along by the Southern cotton embargo. In August, the Navy won the North's first significant victory, capturing the batteries on Cape Hatteras Inlet with minimal casualties. By November, 80 steamers and 60 sailing ships had been added to the fleet, and Port Royal and South Carolina were captured in the same fashion. Port Royal and Cape Hatteras were built up as support bases for the blockade squadrons, a process repeated on Gulf Coast islands. By February 1862, only the ports of Galveston, Mobile, Savannah, Charleston and Wilmington remained open to blockade runners. Under international law, blockade running was legal so long as the ships weren't armed. The only repercussions for captured runners from non-belligerent nations was confiscation of the ship and cargo. The crews were returned home. Thus, blockade running was a low-risk, high-profit business enterprise. Numerous primarily British firms were established to run contraband through the Union blockade. As the blockade tightened, traditional cargo ships were abandoned for purpose-built, shallow-draft, narrow and stealthy blockade runners, with smokeless anthracite coal powering cutting-edge steam engines. Firms legally bought goods in Europe before legally shipping them to Bermuda, the Bahamas or Havana. They would then legally load them onto the blockade runners, who'd wait for suitably dark nights to illegally race past the Union Navy to southern ports. Once they arrived, the smugglers then traded their goods for cotton before running back. A single round trip would pay all expenses and make a handsome profit. The impact of these blockade runners on the war is debated. On the one hand, over 80% of known blockade running attempts succeeded, with the runners delivering at least 600,000 Enfield rifles and countless tons of desperately needed military supplies to the Confederacy. On the other hand, the Union captured or destroyed over 1,500 runners. Only a handful of known runners survived the war, and their deliveries of military arms were far below what the Confederacy actually needed. A full cargo of ammunition was only sufficient to supply 1 division for 1 battle. Additionally, most cargoes weren't meant for the Confederate military. Luxury goods fetched far higher prices, especially women's fashion, and the firms responded accordingly. The Confederate government first legislated runners having to dedicate cargo space for military supplies, then bought its own runners purely for gun running when the firms didn't comply. The bottom line is that Southern trade fell 95% from 1860 to 1865 thanks to the blockade, which caused shortages that the runners didn't alleviate. Realizing that the Union blockade was an existential threat, Mallory was determined to break it, but was undermined at every turn. Many of the Gosport naval guns were diverted for coastal defense or army usage. Many states retained ships and resources for their own use, rather than giving them to the Confederate Navy. Worse, Jefferson Davis called for privateers to attack the Union on April 17, 1861, which further dispersed resources and decentralized naval operations among numerous private captains. This would prove extremely detrimental in the Mississippi theater. With his authority and resources severely undercut, Mallory placed all his hopes on superior technology. The British and French had already built armored ships, which were normal steam and sail ships with armor plating, and Mallory intended to build on that development. he dreamed of purpose-built, steam-powered ironclad gunboats with thick armor and powerful cannons to sink the blockade squadrons with impunity. Unfortunately, building them was a struggle. The Confederacy only had one foundry capable of producing armor plates or engine parts, and it was severely overtaxed making other war materials. It also had few experienced steam engineers and machinists, and little extra iron to work with. With the construction of new ships rapidly falling behind schedule, Mallory placed his hopes on a salvage job. Federal forces burned and scuttled 9 ships when they abandoned Gosport. The old sailing ships were completely destroyed, but the relatively modern screw frigate Merrimac was only burned to the waterline, leaving its engines and lower hull intact. Mallory ordered the Confederacy's first ironclad, the Virginia, to be constructed atop Merrimac's wreckage to speed up construction. The Merrimac's burned timbers were cut away and replaced with an armoured casement. However, construction immediately went wrong. While Virginia was designed as a river and coastal gunboat, Merrimac was an ocean cruiser, and its deep draft hull meant Virginia couldn't actually operate in rivers. Much of the armour plating was of poor quality or missing. Originally designed for 4 inches of armour, only 2 inches, 51mm, were installed, and the gunport shutters never arrived before it went into action. Worse, Merrimac's engines were notoriously fragile and temperamental, which is why it had been mothballed in the first place. A year idle, a month underwater, and almost an extra ton of weight didn't help their performance. Virginia could barely make 5 knots and had a mile-wide turning circle. Its maneuverability was further hindered by installation of a ram. Ramming was back in fashion after the privateer icebreaker-turned-ironclad Manassas attacked and lightly damaged 3 Union warships off New Orleans in December. Additionally, the North knew about Virginia and was building its own ironclad to counter it. Virginia's guns probably wouldn't penetrate another ironclad's armor, but its ram might. The North Atlantic Blockade Squadron knew that Virginia would be coming for them. Flag Officer Goldsborough planned to have his wooden-hulled frigates form a semicircle outside the mouth of the James River, using crossfire to pound the metal monster to death. However, he was in North Carolina when the battle came on March 8, 1862. Recently appointed Confederate flag officer Franklin Buchanan ordered Virginia and 5 converted civilian steamers toward Hampton Roads that morning. However, Virginia didn't reach Union lines until 1330. The sloop USS Cumberland and frigate USS Congress were on station. They opened fire as frigates Minnesota, Roanoke, and St. Lawrence attempted to join the battle, only for the latter 2 to hit sandbars. While the steamers held back, Virginia ploddingly steamed towards Cumberland, seemingly unbothered by converging cannon fire. At 1400, Virginia rammed Cumberland, bursting her hull open. This was an almost fatal error as the ram stuck fast. Virginia would have followed Cumberland to the bottom had its prow not snapped off. Virginia ponderously turned towards Congress. Not knowing the ram was gone, Congress deliberately ran aground to prevent another attack. Instead, it became a sitting duck as steamers joined Virginia's attack. Congress surrendered around 1600. Buchanan emerged from Virginia to accept the surrender, only to be wounded by a sharpshooter on shore. Congress was set ablaze in retaliation. By this time, Minnesota had arrived, but also grounded. The steamers attacked but were severely outgunned, and Virginia couldn't close due to falling tides. She and her squadron retreated to Gosport, intending to return the next day. Virginia hadn't escaped the battle unscathed. Damaged smokestacks reduced its speed to under 3 knots. 2 cannons had been destroyed, and most of the armor plate was bent and loose. The crew spent the night on emergency repairs and sailed out at dawn under Lieutenant Jones to finish off Minnesota. As she laboriously steamed into the road, a strange ship steamed to intercept her. It was the USS Monitor, John Ericsson's brainchild, which had arrived the previous night to defend Minnesota. Specifically designed to operate in coastal waters, Monitor had a shallow draft and low profile, with only its pilot house and an innovative revolving turret showing above the waterline. It was protected by 8 inches, 200mm of armor, and mounted the largest guns Ericsson could find on short notice, 11-inch Dahlgrens. The 2 ironclads spent 4 hours pounding away at each other, with Minnesota adding occasional broadsides. Virginia's gunners could only target Monitor's turret, which rotated the guns into firing position, then rotated again to only present the armor. By 1000, the sheer weight of Monitor's shots were bashing gaps into Virginia's armor, which was temporarily grounded. Then, one of Monitor's guns was disabled by a misfire. After freeing itself, Virginia attempted a ramming attack, which Monitor easily dodged. However, a shot skidded in front of Monitor's pilot house, sending sparks and splinters into the captain's eyes. Monitor circled over a sandbar so command could be transferred, which Virginia interpreted as a retreat. Badly damaged, she returned to Gosport, unaware that Monitor had turned back to re-engage. Consequently, both sides claimed victory. The Battle of Hampton Roads was an unexpected naval watershed. It was the first battle between metal ships in history, and the death knell for wooden warships. However, neither combatant ever fought again. McClellan's arrival at Fort Monroe prompted the Confederates to evacuate Norfolk on May 9th. As Virginia couldn't escape up the shallow James River or to sea, she was burned to avoid capture. Monitor was lost in a storm on December 31st while being towed to the Carolinas. Out west, the Union achieved naval supremacy on the Mississippi after winning the only fleet actions of the war. Due to logistics and bureaucracy, the Western gunboat flotilla was under Army control, despite being officered and crewed by naval personnel. Western Theater Commander Major General Henry Halleck was unconvinced about the flotilla until Flag Officer Andrew Foote explained to him the value of joint operations to take control of river systems. Foote proved the concept alongside U.S. Grant by taking Forts Henry and Donelson in February. In March, he steamed to Island No. 10 in support of John Pope's siege of the fortress, which blocked Union access to the Mississippi below Cairo. Here, another significant naval first was achieved when Foote ran gunboats past the batteries, a feat considered impossible during the Age of Sail. The garrison surrendered on April 8th. At the opposite end of the river, Flag Officer David Farragut and the West Gulf Squadron took note of Foote's actions. Despite being closed to Gulf traffic, New Orleans remained a major port for Mississippi River traffic and coastal shipping through Lake Pontchartrain. Taking the city would deprive the Confederacy of not only its largest city and trade hub, but would open the lower Mississippi to further operations. He just had to get past Forts Jackson and St. Phillips. It was now clear that fixed fortifications couldn't concentrate enough fire against steamships to sink them, a complete reversal from the Age of Sail. Farragut believed that a nighttime run would let him take New Orleans. However, his orders were to coordinate and attack with Benjamin Butler's army and Commander David Porter's mortarboats. Farragut ignored the obstinate Butler, but Porter was his foster brother and had to be given a chance. The Confederates noticed the buildup, but there was little to be done. The New Orleans defenses had been stripped of both men and cannons to support operations further north, believing the forts and a chain between them were sufficient protection. Still, 13 warships were dispatched, although they would only be of a little help. 2 ships were from the Louisiana State Navy, and 5 were Confederate Navy ships, including Manassas, the unfinished Mississippi, and the unsteerable Louisiana. The other 6 were cotton-clad rams from the River Defense Fleet. These were privateers operating steamers with bulkheads filled with compressed cotton for armor, which were organized under the Confederate Army but didn't answer to them or the Navy. There was no command structure or battle plan. Beginning April 18th, Porter's 21 mortar ships began bombarding the forts. However, they did no meaningful damage, and by the 20th, Farragut decided to just run the guns. That night, 3 gunboats successfully broke the chain. Porter's bombardment continued until April 23rd, when Farragut's 17 ships, separated into 3 squadrons, were ready. At 0300 on April 24th, Farragut ordered full steam ahead. The fleet was spotted passing the chain, but panicked Confederate fire couldn't meaningfully damage the fleet as expected. The 3 rear ships turned back, as dawn broke before they passed the forts. Louisiana couldn't effectively engage and was bypassed. Manassas attempted to engage, but was too lumbering to attack effectively. It lightly damaged the USS Mississippi and Brooklyn before being forced aground and set ablaze. As the fleet steamed forward, a fire raft damaged Farragut's flagship, while the Confederate ships attempted to engage. They attacked piecemeal and individually, and were consequently torn apart by concentrated Union gunfire. 2 rams chased and sank USS Varuna in shallow water, but there were no other Union losses. a single cotton-clad escaped to New Orleans to be scuttled alongside Mississippi as Farragut arrived on April 25th. The officers of Forts Jackson and St. Philip intended to resist Butler's advance, but their men mutinied and surrendered on April 29th. Louisiana was burned that same day. The Mississippi Delta was lost to the Confederacy, and Farragut became America's first rear admiral. Back upriver, Foote and Pope had intended to continue downriver to Fort Pillow and Memphis, when Pope was diverted for the Corinth campaign. Unable to take the fort himself, Foote stationed 6 City-class gunboats and 1 converted steamer at Plum Point Bend to protect a mortar boat which bombarded the fort every day starting April 12th. The dreary daily routine of unchallenged bombardments and Foote departing the squadron to recover from wounds let complacency set in. This was the opportunity the surviving river defense fleet was looking for. They'd been waiting downstream from Pillow for an opportunity to attack, and now the Union squadron was ripe for an ambush. The plan was to intercept and sink the Guard gunboat and mortarboat. When the rest of the squadron came to their aid, they'd be overwhelmed and sunk, returning the river to the Confederacy. The fleet got underway on May 9th to attack on May 10th. That morning, the USS Cincinnati was preparing for guard duty when the Confederates appeared around the bend. Unable to retreat due to lack of steam pressure, Cincinnati opened fire on the lead cotton-clad General Bragg. Bragg struck a glancing blow, which sent the ship spinning 180 degrees after the ram got stuck. Cincinnati fired multiple point-blank volleys into Bragg, finally disabling her tiller after the two ships separated. Additional cotton-clads arrived and rammed Cincinnati, which sank into the mud. By now, the rest of the squadron was steaming to help. The 2 cotton-clads retreated due to boiler damage, but General Earl Van Dorn successfully rammed USS Mound City, grounding it on the riverbank. At this point, the gunboats retreated to water that was too shallow for the rams. Facing cannon fire they couldn't match and targets they couldn't reach, the cotton-clads retreated. While Confederate papers claimed a great victory, the bombardment continued the next day, and both sunk gunboats were refloated and back in action by June. The fall of Corinth on May 30th rendered Fort Pillow and Memphis indefensible. All forces were to retreat towards Vicksburg, but there wasn't enough coal for all cotton-clads to make the trip. While their captains argued about what to do, the surviving gunboats from Plum Point Bend, bolstered by 4 rams, arrived on June 6th. Lacking other options, the cotton-clads steamed out for battle. The battle began with the lead Union ram, Queen of the West, ramming Colonel Lovell before being rammed itself. A melee broke out, the details of which are unclear, as every account of the battle contradicts the others. The only certainty is that General Earl Van Dorn escaped downriver to be scuttled a few weeks later. This final fleet engagement confirmed Union brown water supremacy. It was clear to Mallory by June 1862 that he couldn't challenge the Union Navy in any conventional fashion. There were now more monitors than total Confederate warships. Therefore, he shifted focus to new technologies and overseas shipyards. The Confederacy made extensive use of torpedoes and naval mines in modern terminology. Static torpedoes were used to protect waterways, while spar torpedoes were used offensively. A number of Union ships were lost to torpedoes during the war, but they failed to impact any campaign. The most famous of the Confederacy's naval experiments were submarines. H.L. Hunley was building experimental submersibles for the Confederacy in New Orleans before it fell. Afterward, he relocated to Mobile and built the submarine which bore his name, though he really shouldn't have. Deployed to break Charleston's blockade, the craft killed 13 men in training accidents, including Hunley. It was still sent to attack the USS Housatonic in Charleston Harbor on February 17, 1864, and wasn't seen again until its wreck was discovered in 1995. Hunley had sunk Housatonic and itself with its spar torpedo, instantly killing its 8 crewmen due to the physics of underwater explosions and shockwaves in confined spaces. Far more successful were the commerce raiders. Davis's privateers were defeated by late 1861, but Mallory acquired actual warships with trained crews. A loophole in British and international law allowed neutral nations to build warships for belligerent nations so long as they didn't arm them themselves. Therefore, Mallory had Confederate agents, helped by sympathetic British officials, pay British shipyards to build and crew commerce raiders for the Confederacy. They'd be sailed to the Azores, take on Confederate officers and cannons, and then be set loose on Union shipping. While these raiders did considerable damage, they'd all be destroyed by Union cruisers or seized before launching. The most famous raider, Alabama, captured 65 ships before being cornered and sunk in Cherbourg Harbor by USS Kearsarge on June 19, 1864. The Florida was seized from under the Brazilian Navy's nose in the port of Salvador. The US and Britain almost came to blows when the Laird shipyard began constructing turreted rams for the Confederacy. The confrontation forced the government to quietly buy the rams and stop turning a blind eye toward pro-Confederate activities. The naval theatre was effectively concluded in August 1864. Only Mobile and Wilmington remained open to blockade runners, and Farragut intended to close Mobile. Defended by 3 forts, a minefield, 3 gunboats, and the ironclad Tennessee, the position was formidable. However, Farragut was confident in his fleet, bolstered by 4 monitors for the operation. At dawn on August 5th, Farragut approached the entrance to the bay. His wooden ships were lashed together in pairs, while the monitors took the inside track to shield them from cannon fire. The Confederate fleet, under Franklin Buchanan, prepared to meet them behind the minefield. The monitor Tecumseh opened the firing at 0647. The fort guns were quickly suppressed, but Tecumseh strayed into the minefield and was sunk. Confusion reigned until Farragut issued an order that mythmakers shortened to "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," and led the fleet over part of the minefield whose torpedoes were too waterlogged to detonate. The gunboats were quickly dispatched, but Buchanan intended to fight Tennessee to the death. However, Tennessee was too slow to ram the mobile Union fleet, and its guns were too weak to do much damage. After 2 hours of concentrated pummeling, Tennessee surrendered. The Army closed Wilmington in January 1865 by capturing Fort Fisher. In 4 years, the Union Navy had grown to 671 active-duty ships and completely isolated the Confederacy. The Confederate Navy had never stood a chance, yet ironically, it was also the Confederacy's last holdout. Commerce raider Shenandoah fired the war's final shot in June 1865 and didn't surrender until November. Join us next time as we rewind the clock to 1861 for the start of the Western Theatre. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.